The channel. I have some horrible news. I got my truck all back together, and when I went to fire it up, not but 2 minutes after, something fell down into one of the cylinders and started knocking around and cracking around in one of the cylinders and basically grenaded one of the cylinders. Now, shockingly, only the piston was damaged, and maybe I bent a valve at the top of the motor. I'm not 100% sure, but I saw a valve imprint on the piston head, which that's never a good thing, so we'll have to see how that works out. But surprisingly, I still have compression inside of that cylinder. Shockingly, I don't even know how. I have one single score that goes down the cylinder wall where, that either nut, chunk of metal, something dislodged from somewhere. I don't know if it was a chunk of the turbo or if it was contaminated intercooler system, but we're not going to get into that because that's not what this channel's about. This is the Desert Spring, and here we talk about other things, not cars and motors and shit. But let's get into it. So today I thought to myself, okay, well, what do I want to do today? I've been talking about it. I've been wanting to touch on the topic for a long time, and I said, to hell with it. Let's just get into it and just see how it goes. So you guys know I've chatted about this for quite a bit. Secret Life of Plants from Remote Viewing Practice. That's their channel, Secret Life of Plants Experiments. Now, for those who don't know, The Secret Life of Plants is a book that was published to kind of, publish all of the experiments that this guy had done with his laboratory partner. And basically these kind of anomalous, it's actually funny how I came across this book. It was whenever I was in college. At that point, I was a pretty hard atheist. I was studying plants for carbon capture. So the idea was, at least for me, the idea was which plant is superior at consolidating carbon into physical form, right? So obviously, plants use the carbon from the CO2 that's emitted from, our exhale, the vehicles, whatever. Plants consolidate that carbon into their leaves, into their stems, into physical form. And so my thing was, okay, well, what plant would be the best at consolidating carbon, but would also be a relatively useful plant to have, And you get grasses and things like that. But I was curious, and so this is kind of how I initially went down the rabbit hole of studying plants whenever I was in college. And eventually, I don't know, I was performing some experiments with, I basically had a plant inside, and I would measure the surface area of the leaf, and I would have an oxygen sensor, CO2 sensor inside of a sealed container with the plant. And then I would just monitor the rate of change and then swap out the plant, put another plant in it, monitor rate of change, swap out the plant, put another plant, monitor rate of change, and then try to get an rough square area, or an area of plant leaf, if you would, for, however, micrograms of carbon per millimeter squared of plant surface area on a plant. That's kind of the route that I was going. And so one of these days I decided I was just going to hook up one of the plants that I had to an EMG device. Why I had these things at my house, let's not get into that, geek times 1,000 over here. But yeah, so I eventually hooked up one of these plants to an electrical device because I decided I wanted to monitor the electrical activity just to see if there was anything. I mean, I've already got this, all this crap already hooked up to it. I was monitoring the light intensity, the wavelength of the light, making sure to stay in a specific wavelength across tests, making sure to stay within a specific light intensity across tests, just doing the whole standard thing. And I connected this plant to this electrical, to an EMG device, which is what you measure electrical stimuli with, right? Whether it's a muscle tension or your heartbeat or your thoughts, whatever. You place these electrodes on your body and it'll measure the difference in electrical potential, no different from a glorified multimeter, right? And so they work off of the same principle. You typically have we have one grounding lead and then 1 to 2 kind of detector leads. And how the actual instrument works internally, I'm not 100% sure, but I know it's similar to that of a multimeter where it's just measuring potential. And then that change in potential, because every single time something happens, something cray-cray happens, there's a change in potential, electrical potential that can be registered by a tool. And so yeah. So connecting my plant to it, I didn't expect to see anything. I was expecting to see a kind of a baseline thing. And then I noticed that there was a really consistent rhythm in the plant baseline electrical activity, different from anything else that I would connect it. Typically on a machine, you're just going to hear noise, right? Whenever you connect it to a human body, you see the little QPRS, because that's the heart and all the muscles. Everybody's creating that electrical potential. And so you see the QRS complex and all that crap. Well, when I connected it to a plant, I expected to just see what you see when you don't have leads connected to anything, which is just kind of room noise, static electricity, that kind of thing. What I was shocked to find out was when I connected it to a plant, I did not see room noise. I actually saw a kind of a very consistent electrical signal that was being given off of the plant, which really shocked me because I was not expecting a consistent electrical signal. I was only expecting noise. I wasn't expecting much. Like the kind of noise you would expect if you connected your finger to a machine. You wouldn't really see anything spectacular because the electrodes are not going to be reading. If I connected an electrode from here to there, the electrical signal that's going to be read is straight across. It's not, none of these sensors are going to beam electricity through the entirety of your body and then back out. No, electricity always takes the shortest path. And so it's only going to beam at the point and go across a straight across line, which is why when they're doing any sort of cardiac tests, they always have leads going all the way around the side of your body. It's because they're trying to capture sending electricity kind of through your body to measure the resistance and the changes in resistance, all that kind of shit. Anyways, long ass story, nerdy ass content. So I thought that was anomalous. I was like, that's interesting. I didn't expect to see that. Now, once again, I never studied plants. I'd studied biology, animal physiology, cellular physiology, but my work was with mammalian cells. It wasn't with plant cell types. I mean, I may have had 1 or 2 classes on plant cell types, and that's about it. It was all mammalian stuff. And mammalian and, microorganism crap. Single-celled organisms. So here I am with this plant, and I'm like, wow, that's really crazy. I go to touch the plant. The plant's electrical activity just kind of shoots all over the place. And I'm like, that's crazy. But immediately I'm thinking, okay, well, the detector must be picking up on my electrical activity because obviously when I touch the plant, I'm making an electrical connection with the plant. So let me take a non-conducting glass rod, because people have these things in their apartments. the ultra Metatron of nerds over here. So I just casually went into the makeup drawer and grabbed a non-conductive glass rod. And I whacked the shit out of the plant. And what I found was that after whacking the shit out of the plant not only had an increase in electrical activity, but it was for a longer duration of time. So whenever I touched the plant, I had saw electrical activity for maybe 1/10 of a second, maybe 2/10 of a second. When I whacked the plant, I had increased that duration to maybe 0.5 seconds of increased electrical activity, and the frequency was such it was simply more dramatic. I mean, imagine the difference, your physiological difference in reaction of me touching you versus me punching you, right? Two very different reactions is what you'd expect to see. So, so then I went down a long ass rabbit hole as to why this thing was reacting at all, and that led me to kind of doing a bunch of research and eventually coming across this, The Secret Life of Plants. For those who don't know the book, I don't have the book here with me. One of those books that you loan to a friend and you never get it back. I want my book back, Susan. No, I'm just kidding. No, the only reason why I want that one back, I'd totally get her another one. But that one, I highlighted a bunch of stuff and like took notes inside of it and stuff like that, because I was kind of like using that book and recreating those experiments and stuff like that. And so I really would like that specific book back over, just getting another book. So, but with that being said, this is what really put me on the path of exploring plant consciousness. And so we'll just casually watch some of these videos and I'll kind of interject some of these things. Way to skip the fucking intro. Hi, I'm John from the Desert Spring. Please like and subscribe. And if you'd like to tell your story, you can reach out to me at the Desert Spring. Click, damn it. There it is. DesertSpring111@gmail.com. I always love reading your guys's. Sometimes you guys don't necessarily want to be a part of the channel or have an interview or talk about why you left Christianity. You just want to send me support, and I really do appreciate those emails. They keep me going. And so let's see here. Where's my little dealio? Oops, not that one. Click this button here. Jeez, there it is. Look. Okay. Anyways, back to I designed this damn app that I'm using, and now I'm like trying to figure out how to use my own freaking creation. All right, so here it is, The Secret Life of Plants. This is the author himself. I want to say his name is Bill Fick. Nope, it's not Bill Fick. That's how bad my memory has gotten. What's his name? Okay. Well, hopefully he introduces himself in the video. But he's one of the authors. I haven't seen any of these videos. A lot of these experiments were performed back in the 60s and 70s and stuff like that. They never really got anywhere as far as publication, because these experiments tend to be difficult to recreate because you're dealing with animals, right? You're not dealing with, it's like, okay, I walked into a cage and I, touched a gorilla and the gorilla smacked me. Well, you're not going to experience that with every single gorilla interaction. That's not going to be something that's very well repeatable, right? Now, if you go into a cage and you stare at a gorilla, the question is, does the gorilla have the sensation of somebody staring at them? Because that's something which that's another thing that we'll go down and eventually into. So with that being said, let's just get into this video. I know you guys have probably never heard of this topic before, but this is kind of what changed me. So what they're using here are polygraphs. I don't have polygraph. I was using an EMG. Basically, the most sensitive test equipment that I have are oscilloscopes and EMGs, and my oscilloscopes are nothing fancy. I would have to say that my EMG is probably more sensitive than my oscilloscope, but nonetheless, this is the video. We'll just get into it.
February 2nd, 1966. I'd been in the polygraph field full-time for 18 years.
Can't hear him that well.
This particular morning...
This is classic old video stuff. That's turned all the way up. My speakers are turned all the way up. Okay, well, I will just move that closer, I guess. I hope you guys can hear it. It'd be really disappointing if you can't.
2nd, 1966. I'd been in the polygraph field full-time for 18 years. And this particular morning, I'd been working all night in the laboratory and had decided to water a plant in the lab, very similar to the plant here, Dracaena cane plant. My thought was that as the moisture arrived to the leaf of the plant, the plant should be a better conductor, and I should get a reading on the chart. Well, strangely enough, I didn't get this at all, and in fact, it did just the opposite. Instead of the tracing edging upward as it should have on the chart, it went into sort of a wild excitation, very similar to the first part of a human taking a polygraph test. But then it occurred to me, just about 14 minutes along, what would be the real optimum threat to the well-being of a plant. In fact, the imagery of fire entered my mind, and I not only thought, but I fully intended to burn the very leaf that was being tested with a match. Now, I had no matches in the room at the time, and I don't smoke, and I had to go next door to my secretary's area to get a match. But the interesting thing is that right at the split second that imagery of fire entered my mind, the tracing reflecting the changes in the plant just went right off the top of the page.
So that's him talking about, if you can't hear that, I really hope you guys can hear that. I guess I'll narrate a little bit of what he said just in case you guys can't hear that. But essentially, he connected this plant to a polygraph machine, kind of like me, expecting to see nothing interesting. And he saw a lot of kind of crazy noise and crazy excitation voltages. And then whenever he went to go water the plant, maybe at the moment of watering, this I most likely am getting wrong, even though I just heard it 30 seconds ago. At the moment of watering, maybe there was some excitation that may not be 100% accurate. But what he says is that eventually he decides, okay, well, what would be the ultimate electrical stimuli for a plant? Well, it would have to be fire, lighting the plant on fire. And at the very moment that he had that thought and had that intention of lighting the plant on fire, the plant is now having these dramatic electrical stimuli and electrical reactions to the very thought and intention of a human being. Now, I want you to think about that, because this is what ripped my world apart, my 3D world apart. How can a thought and an intention trapped inside of my brain cause a reaction in a thing that is outside of me, right? I'm wearing rubber-soled shoes. I am electrically isolated from the planet, and that thing is sitting in a plastic pot. It's also electrically isolated from the planet, yet its reaction is matching up with my very thought and intention. And Mythbusters actually did a lot of these experiments, because I went down the hellish of rabbit holes on this thing. Because to me, it was, at the time, it was just such mind-boggling information. Mythbusters had did an episode on this, where they basically repeated a lot of the experiments that they had conducted in this book. Not all of them, but a majority of them. And they found that a lot of them were bang on. The intense focus of the intention, setting the intention of, I'm going to burn this plant down. The plant will experience increased electrical activity, versus baseline, where baseline is a very clear baseline. You could see kind of some of the results on the polygraph, where the baseline is just kind of regular noise. This is kind of that consistent. Maybe he's got an older machine, or the machines of today are a bit more clean with their data, but you can kind of see a consistent rhythm, which is what I was picking up on my machines. And then the intention shot the machine through the roof up to, how many hundreds of millivolts or whatever, as far as the electrical potential. The plant's basic reaction to a person saying, I'm going to burn you, right? This is why I love plants so much. But that takes away the idea that our thoughts stay in our heads, right? Because either the thoughts don't stay in our heads or something is secreted out of our body, but it is at the very moment. It's at the moment that you think about these things, the moment that you set the intention is when everything around you tends to react to it. And so that's the question is, then we get down the rabbit hole that I went down of how can I isolate this? Like what can block the signal so that I can better hypothesize what that signal would be, right? Sticking me in a vacuum chamber. The idea that whales, when whales are communicating, their medium of communication is water, right? Sperm whales, you whack a click through the water, and the water is such a good conductor of sound and vibration that all those molecules are able to collide, and these sperm whales are able to communicate with each other, thousands of miles away. Whereas you pull them both out of the water, and air not being as great of a conductor of their communication type, when you whack one of their clicks into the air, it may die after 2 to 3 miles. And so our very communication that I am with you guys right this moment, let's think about it, right? I am speaking, the diaphragm in my throat is colliding with the air and producing these very specific sound waves that are being picked up by a diaphragm. If I take and seal myself in a vacuum cleaner and suck all of the air with a vacuum, not a vacuum cleaner, it'd have to be like an actual vacuum. If I was in a vacuum box, if I was inside of a thermos, no, I'm just kidding. But seriously, if we sucked all the air out of this room, I would sit here, my bodies would be doing the same contraction, I'd be doing the same motion, but you wouldn't hear me. Why? Because none of the collisions, none of the particles that are there that my voice are colliding with are reaching the diaphragm, right? If you held your cell phone or whatever device you're watching this from, a laptop, whatever, you took that speaker and you sat inside of a vacuum chamber and you set the phone down because we don't want any of the vibrations to potentially travel up your hand. You sat the phone down on a table and you put yourself in this room, you vacuumed out the room. Once again, not with a Dyson, you vacuumed all the air out of the room and you hit play and you turned your phone on the max volume, assuming that there aren't any kind of some sort of bone conductive vibrations where, you have your foot on the pedestal and the vibrations are traveling down through the pedestal and entering your foot and going to your eardrums or some shit like that, something crazy. You would not hear the speaker on your phone even at max volume. Why? Because the diaphragm on the speaker is acting like your throat. It is colliding with the air particles. Those collisions are propagating as waves throughout space and time to get to your eardrums, right? If you reverse time, you reverse the direction of but that's impossible. Even though one time I tried to prove that it was possible and I spent 3 weeks like a mad fucking man in my room with my walls covered in fucking math equations trying to prove that you could reverse time. We're not going to go down that route. I was fucking crazy. But with that being said, that was years ago. I promised I'm a changed person now. But with that being said, you take out the medium of communication that's used for communication, you halt communication. And so that was my thing is, okay, what medium is being used here? What can we put in between it? What can we, just like if I put a big ass foam board, sound deadening board in front of my face and then try to speak to you, you may not be able to hear what I'm trying to say. Well, then there's, okay, this does it. So then we could hypothesize what this thing is doing, right? And so I was kind of wanting to do the same thing with plants, with separating the intention versus the plant picking up on the intention. And then, then testing equipment gets a bit too expensive. So But yes, that you heard this right. The very thought, the very second of intention, the very moment of intention was the very moment that the plant reacted to that intention, which at the time, for me, this was before at the time I was very much atheist and all that kind of shit. This is really what really started getting gears turning in my brain.
And the only thing that occurred at that time, no lighting of a match, nothing else, merely the imagery of fire. Reflecting the changes in the plant just went right off the top of the page. And the only thing that occurred at that time, no lighting of a match, nothing else, merely the imagery of fire. And I must say that as of 14 minutes along in that initial observation on the morning of February 2nd, 1966, my life just hasn't been the same.
During the next 6 hours, at some undetermined moment chosen by a randomizer, these brine shrimp will fall to their deaths in boiling water. In another room, completely separate from his laboratory, Baxter has placed the philodendron plant, a polygraph, and a videotape recorder. Carefully, he places a leaf between a pair of electrodes that will monitor the electrical activity of the plant.
For the automation of this experiment to be successful, I have to get a certain distance away from my lab so that my consciousness won't affect the results.
So basically, what's happening in this experiment, he has a randomizer. For those who don't know what a randomizer is, it's basically a machine that will send a trigger at a genuinely random moment in time to where the person who is performing the experiment does not know. Their consciousness does not know when it's going to trigger, right? So, for instance, if I set a 15-minute timer, a 20-minute timer, my consciousness knows that there's a 20-minute timer. And thus, my consciousness is involved. This was all very mind-boggling shit for me, years ago, 7 years ago or something like that. Has it been 7 years? I think about 7 years ago. Damn, time flies. Holy shit. This was all very mind-boggling shit. And so, yeah, I had performed a couple of experiments where there was a difference in data when I was involved and when I was completely uninvolved, right? Not involved at all. And so, in which case my ex-wife was involved in a couple of them because I was like, okay, I need you at a very random time, unbeknownst to me, But so essentially this experiment, he's taking a cup of shrimp, all of these experiments, and we'll slowly kind of go through and I'll we'll have a chat about this because this book really does, and then it's just like the beginning of the rabbit hole. Then you just keep digging and digging and digging and digging and digging, and you find more, you find more, you find more, you find more, and then your entire perception of reality has been fucked. So he's taking a cup of shrimp, and he's taking the cup of shrimp and dumping the cup of shrimp into boiling water. At the moment that the shrimp are dead, that's when the plant reacts to the shrimp being dead, right? Let's think about this for a minute. What's actually happening? Okay. So his consciousness is not involved because he's got a randomizer. Okay. So there is a cup of water of shrimp in a different room in the building, and there is a plant connected to a polygraph in a separate room. And at a random moment, the cup is going to flip. The shrimp are going to drop into a vat of boiling water, killing the shrimp. At the very moment that the vat kills, the vat flips, it kills. Now, why would you need the randomizer? Well, because potentially the plant, at the moment that you had the thought that you were going to create this experiment, the plant could potentially react to it, or maybe it couldn't, right? These are touchy things to duplicate. I've duplicated a couple of them, but these are touchy things to duplicate because plants are alive. Plants are like animals, right? It's like me saying, if you walk up to a dog in an aggressive manner, the dog is going to bark at you and bite you. Well, that's not the case for every single dog, even within the same species, right? If I walk up to a dog in an aggressive manner, by one dog, I'll get bit. by another dog, I'll get the dog getting scared. In another manner, I'll get the dog getting super excited and wanting to play with me, right? That's the reason why a lot of this research back in the 60s was kind of like hand waved off, is because none of the experiments are repeatable. Now, in chemistry labs, in physics labs, yes, these things are repeatable. Why? Because their consciousness is not such that it is extremely developed. Plants' consciousnesses are extremely developed. And so, yeah, just because you have this idea you're going to run this experiment on a plant, these plants are sentient things. And so the idea that you're going to walk up to this plant and this plant is just going to comply, it depends on the plant, right? If you walk into a zoo, expecting to take a picture of a gorilla playing with the beach ball, when you arrive, the gorilla may have no interest in playing with the beach ball, right? And so that's why a lot of these things, they're a bit finicky when it comes to the recreations, which is the reason why a lot of them were hand waved away, is because, okay, well, this isn't repeatable. We've run your one experiment one time, it didn't work, and that's just how animals are, right? But so we'll continue with this. So we see here a strong reaction to a couple of animals dying in the other room.
The results of each night's work must be carefully analyzed and recorded.
Get y'all guys closer to it so you can hear it better.
The results of each night's work must be carefully analyzed and recorded. In spite of his high percentage of successful results, only a few daring individuals from the scientific establishment have come forward with offers to replicate his experiments or test his results. The great majority are content simply to condemn his efforts without taking the trouble to investigate their validity.
A few brine shrimp die and a plant feels their death. I think it's the smallness of the event that makes it so significant. It means that even on the lower levels of life, there's a profound consciousness or an awareness that binds all things together.
As you can see, we have a normal copper screen and such as that Faraday cage, block out electromagnetic signals, radiations. But in addition to that, we have a plexiglass over here that blocks the wind movements and ion movements and air flows that would, shake the plant, cause abnormal signals. We also have a motion detector in here, which will allow us to look and see whether any external motions or movements have interfered with the experiment, so we can tell when the plant is actually vibrating.
Where's the subject with respect to the cage now?
We're going to seat him within a few feet of the cage, probably about 5 feet, and he'll be viewing a screen. We'll be watching a stimulus movie that we're providing. And then his emotional responses should carry over into the cage here and affect the plant.
So you can see the baseline on that. So they didn't explain that one that well in the video, but there's a difference between showing images of just kind of nature, trees, things like that, and showing images of a predator. And so you can see that the plant didn't react to positive emotions, neutral emotions from another being. The other being, I want to say in this specific instance, was like a cricket or something like that. I forget. It was so many years ago. I'd probably have to pick the book back up. But essentially, they are just showing this insect or whatever, images of nature. Sure, there's a touch of a reaction out of the subject, but it's nothing of fear. And so the subject is just sitting there, and the plant's not reacting at all. Then they show that specific subject images of its predator, its natural predator. And as you can see, off the charts, kind of being off of the page right here. When that happens, this little being is freaking the hell out for dear life, and the plant is responding to this little being being scared for its life, right? That's what it comes down to. And so you could see right here where the so this is just kind of baseline noise, nothing there to be interested in either the plant or the subject. We get some nature shots. The subject seems to have a small, you could say that's negligible. You could call that more noise. Maybe it was tracking down here and it went up to here. Okay, maybe that was a touch of a reaction. Maybe that was nothing at all. Maybe the subject wasn't experiencing anything at all. But when the scene shifts from plants to predator, suddenly you have the subject freaking the hell out, and the plant's response to that massive stimuli or that massive fear. And so the question was, okay, are the plants reacting to strictly fear and nothing else, or what, right?
Got that one. He's doing real well with that image.
That looks very convincing. I have to think about that one. Well, let's...
showing crickets an image of a nuclear bomb. All right, I just have to pick the book back up to see what exactly.
Say that the experiment is quite well done. Then you're claiming that the individual's response is producing some kind of energy display. When you're finished analyzing your data and it supports your contentions, you can imagine what importance this will be. You can imagine it'll change our whole picture of how we relate to plants, that we're interacting with them all the time.
Dr. and Mrs. Kenneth Hashimoto. Relying on her affinity for plants, Mrs. Hashimoto looks forward to actual conversation with her cactus. Convinced that it possesses an intelligence, she is determined to teach it the Japanese alphabet.
Research conducted in the Soviet Union leads scientists to believe that plants may think. Attached to delicate electronic instruments, a cabbage plant registers annoyance to the exhaling of tobacco smoke on its leaf surfaces. A scene familiar in any kitchen.
That's an old-ass oscilloscope. That's crazy. That is hard Soviet-style oscilloscope. That would be interesting to connect my plant to an oscilloscope. Y'all let me know if you want me to do that. That would be pretty fun. We can make a video of it.
Takes on special importance in this experiment. In some mysterious way, the plant which is attached to the instrument is able to feel the mutilation of its comrade.
It's actually really interesting. So one of the experiments that I had done was so I had taken the main plant body, and I connected electrodes to the main plant body, and then cut off a chunk of the plant body. Now, as you'd expect, a dude just lost his arm. He's going to complain about it, right? And so, sure, tons of electrical activity, all that kind of stuff. Whenever I connected that separate piece to the plant, whacked at it again, the separate piece also had its own freaking out, showing that even though that part is separate from the main plant body, it is still very much, alive, reactive, all that kind of stuff. And so then I went and stuck it in the fridge for a couple of days, pulled it back out, did my tests again, still very much alive and reacted. I had some onions and some things inside of the refrigerator that had been there for a very long time, and peeled back a couple of the layers, connected that bit, had to let it cool down, or warm up, I guess, technically speaking. And yeah, I was still very much alive and reactive and all that kind of stuff. And so this absolutely fucked my idea that veganism was right, because I'm like, these things are screaming for you want to eat fresh food. You're not even cooking your meals. At least do them the decency of sauteing them first. But yeah, after that, it really killed the vegan argument in my mind, just because at that point, my perception of things changed from, being a vegetarian and being a vegan is like a thing because plants are just as alive. They feel just as much. In which case, my change has just been, dispatching things respectively, and to make sure that I'm supporting dispatching animals and plants the like, respectively, whenever I eat them. You don't have to be as cuckoo as me. I enjoy being cuckoo like cocoa nuts. But, Cocoa Puffs. For Cocoa Puffs. It's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Jesus. Sorry. Anyways, back to the vid.
In a more advanced experiment, technicians were asked to pass through a laboratory containing 2 living cabbage plants. One of the subjects has been instructed to destroy the plant which is not attached to the electronic instruments. Hours later, the technicians are asked to return to the scene of the crime. The evidence is clear. The remaining plant has...
So let's talk about this, because once again, they didn't explain that experiment very well whatsoever. So what they had done in that experiment is basically they had 2 plants inside of a room. One of them is connected to a oscilloscope, and the other is a tech. And oscilloscopes are really good because oscilloscopes really do pick up, like, pico voltages and shit like that. They are insanely precise and insanely sensitive when it comes to picking up voltages and things like that. And so what this oscilloscope, they had a plant connected to an oscilloscope. Now, one of the bad things with an oscilloscope is you have a display. My oscilloscope, the older oscilloscopes may not have been as great at this, but my oscilloscope, I can record data and things like that. And I can really just crank down the time, because in an oscilloscope, you can speed up time to view just a nanosecond or a picosecond or a microsecond or whatever. And you can slow it all the way down to seeing like 4 to 5 seconds of data, right? Or something like that, in which case you'll see the kind of crazy lines and things. Instrumentation is amazing. I love scientific instruments. I used to go to this little scientific supply shop just to go stare at their graduated cylinders. I mean, this is the level of nerd we're talking about, guys. But so one goes in there, she goes and she kills the plants. All the people walk through, one of them kills the plants. Whenever they do the experiment hours later, all the people walk back through, but the plant only reacts to the very specific individual who is responsible for killing the plant, which means that the plants are able of perceiving about like crows, right? Because crows, when you walk through a park and you have a specific mask on and you go beat up a bird all the crows are going to pin danger with you specifically. And so whenever you come around, everybody's going to say, oh, look, there's that guy. But crows have eyeballs and brains, and we understand that. How does that happen with plants? What is it about each individual person that they have either plants can see with some sort of sensory, cell that we're unfamiliar with, or every human has a very specific energetic signal that they can differentiate between people? I don't know, but this is like the absolute geekathon of craziness in me wants to go down this route, because that's insane.
Has correctly identified the assailant. Since 1959, the Academy of Sciences of the Union of... Hours later, the technicians are asked to return to the scene of the crime. The evidence is clear. The remaining plant has correctly identified the assailant. Since 1959, the Academy of Sciences of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics has advanced research for the application of automation and cybernetics in plant husbandry. Connected to electronic instrumentation, these plants express their wishes directly, without the need of human guidance. In agricultural centers of the future, plants will show themselves to be fully rational beings, controlling their intake of water and nutrients, and even regulating the temperature and humidity of their environment. We're just beginning to understand the language of plants. It is a difficult and fascinating road wherein a multitude of surprises await.
I started my work on plants in 1962 while I was an engineer in the aerospace industry. And at that time, it was one of our goals to develop jam-proof missile components. Now, after much experimentation, my attention turned to living plant material, in particular to plant leaves. As time went on, and I experimented with these various plants and plant leaves, I noted very unusual reaction patterns. Now, at that time, I thought that my equipment was defective. It did not occur to me that I was witnessing a profound consciousness in these living plants. But I was an engineer, a nuts and bolts man. I needed to perfect a machine-based system just for the specific purpose of finding out the truth about consciousness in plants. And to my extreme surprise, it worked. There is indeed a consciousness in the plant kingdom.
So that's the end of the video. Let me know what you guys think. One of these buttons, there it is. Yeah, so this was kind of the thing for me whenever I initially kind of went through all of this stuff, is that first of all, it absolutely fucked my brain, and it made it to where I had to take a hard look at what my perception of reality really was. And in this video, they go over like 3 to 4 of the insane number of experiments that they performed. If you go over the book, it's just chapters and chapters and chapters and chapters and chapters of experiments. And so, unfortunately, this went absolutely nowhere. Obviously, back in the 60s, they were hoping for a brighter future, but it went absolutely nowhere. With that being said, it's one of those things where they did a lot of different tests as far as like, okay, well, shrimp are multicellular organisms. Would plants react the same with single-celled organisms? And indeed, they reacted the same with single-celled organisms. They are using bacteria. They had a vat of bacteria. And they had essentially performed that same randomizer experiment where they had dumped the vat of bacteria into a thing of boiling water. And so, okay, well then, at what point, the first thing that comes to my mind is at what point does the plant not give a fuck, right? Like how many how many bacteria can you pull out of, okay, so first we're doing a 1 milliliter pipette of bacteria. Now we're doing a 0.5 millimeter pipette. Now we're doing a 3 microliter pipette. And now we're doing a 1 microliter pipette. At what point does the plant just not give a shit that cells are dying? And so it's really, really interesting stuff. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video today. I'm going to go ahead and stop it here. Because I do have another book coming in the mail, because I was looking all over for mine, realizing that I had given it to a friend and that I'd never gotten it back. So another one's coming in the mail. But okay, I hope you guys enjoyed. Please like and subscribe. If you'd like to reach out to me, it's this button here. Hello. And yeah, so we're going to go ahead and end it here and see you guys later.